Heavy infighting between rival extremist militant groups leaves more than 60 dead in Deir el-Zur province as the Syrian army makes major advances on the strategic Miha town. And violence across Iraq, including an attack on Shia pilgrims, claims more than 30 lives in 24 hours. Hello, you're watching Al Ittijah World News. I'm Zainab Alawi. The government in Kiev has expanded its military operations in eastern Ukraine as armed forces entered the city of Luhansk, where clashes erupted with pro-Russian activists, leaving at least one person dead.
It's a battle of guns and roses. Ukrainians kill Ukrainians and commit fratricide over different political perspectives. The government in Kiev has broadened its military operations in eastern Ukraine after dozens of people were killed in bloody clashes in the port city of Odessa. From Odessa to Kramatorsk to Mariupol to Luhansk, the Ukrainian armed forces have attacked pro-Russian activists. At least one person was shot dead and two others sustained wounds when Ukrainian soldiers raided checkpoints set up by pro-Russian activists in the city of Luhansk. Upon learning that more soldiers were being deployed, self-defense forces blocked several bases across the city and seized control of a TV building, cutting off all transmissions from Ukrainian stations. Government troops have also launched operations in Konstantinovka and Kramatorsk in the Donetsk region, as well as the southeastern city of Mariupol. Lifting up their arms, pro-Russian protesters believe they have no other option but to fight back.
We're doing this because of what happened in Odessa, Sloviansk and Kramatorsk. We cannot bear it that our brothers and sisters were killed. We are shedding tears for that. So we're waiting for our enemies with our guns in hand.
All the world can hear our appeals, but nobody cares about us. Only Russia is willing to offer help to us. Why do they attack us? Why can't the residents and children in Sloviansk live in peace? We want peace rather than war. We will not use the automatic rifles to kill anyone, and we just want to use it to protect our children. We have to do this.
Torn between war and peace, pro-Russian activists in Slavyansk are standing their ground.
The whole town, the whole of Donbas regions, as you can see, we used to live quietly. Nobody demanded anything. We just wanted peace. That is it. No Nazism. We have always been like brothers, and we hope it will stay that way.
Meanwhile, members of the OSCE team arrived in Berlin after being released by pro-Russian activists in eastern Ukraine. Despite threats from Kiev and a heavy-handed crackdown ordained by authorities, pro-Russian Ukrainians, it seems, will continue demanding autonomy as they refuse to go down without a fight.
At least 30 pro-Russian activists were released after protesters stormed a police headquarters in the Ukrainian port city of Odessa. Thousands of angry protesters calling for autonomy had gathered outside the building, shouting anti-Kiev slogans before they forced their way in. The freed activists were detained during the Odessa clashes on Friday, which left more than 40 people dead. And during a visit to Odessa, Ukrainian Prime Minister Arseniy Yatsenyuk accused Russia of orchestrating the deadly events in the city as part of a plan to destroy Ukraine.
It's a tragedy not just for Odessa, but for the whole of Ukraine, when dozens of people fell victim to a well-planned provocation against the people, against Ukraine, and against Odessa. I instructed the prosecutor's office to set up a joint investigation team with participation of all divisions to find all of the instigators, organizers, and all those who under Russian leadership started lethal attacks against Ukraine and Odessa.
To discuss this further is political analyst Chris Bambry joining us from London. Mr. Bambry, good to have you with us today. So is Ukraine on the brink of civil war?
It's clearly in a very dangerous situation, and I am shocked to hear the Ukrainian Prime Minister speaking from Odessa, somehow blaming the Russians for the death of 42 people in a trade union building burnt out by a right-wing mob in the city. This chimes with the way this has been reported in the West, where the implications are as these people set fire to the building and killed themselves, they'd been engaged in a gun attack, that they'd been fighting, involved in street fighting. None of this makes any sense. If you look at the death toll in Odessa, which was simply one-sided, the 42 people killed belonged to the group, Russian nationalist group. The building was under attack by far right-wing mobs. The Ukrainian police had withdrawn, allowing them to set fire to it. And yet somehow the Ukrainian Prime Minister is alleging that Russia is responsible for the death of people who are siding with it. And I think we really have to step back at this moment and say the Ukrainian government needs to pull back from its military operations in the east of the country. The violence and the death toll is mounting as we speak. The West has to stop its reporting of Ukraine as if it's somehow some democratic bastion. It should be reporting the fact, honestly, that there has been a pogrom in Odessa, but carried out by right-wing groups. And as I speak, I understand those right-wing groups are coming back into the city following the release of the pro-Russian separatists. And the West should end the sorts of rhetoric we've heard, the anti-Russian rhetoric, and indeed the sending of arms. The British government today apparently has sent forces to the Baltic states. We need a de-escalation of this situation. And the military operations we are seeing by the Ukrainian forces in the east of the country are what is now threatening civil war.
Will Russian troops be forced to eventually intervene?
I think Russia has no wish. It's said to the Americans, it's said very openly, it does not want to intervene. It does not want to invade Ukraine. It has its own recent experience in Afghanistan. It knows what the situation would be in Ukraine if it tried to, and it doesn't want to. However, the killing of pro-Russian demonstrators in Odessa and elsewhere is going to put mounting pressure on the Putin administration to do something. And that, I think, is what some of these Ukrainian far-right nationalists want, is they actually want this kind of civil war. I hope Russia doesn't intervene, but at the same time, I think we have to understand that it's not surprising, given what's happened in Odessa, that people are taking up arms to resist the Ukrainian state security forces as they move into the cities of eastern Ukraine. Odessa is a warning of what happens if these people are allowed to take control. So it's a very dangerous situation. And the only hope here is we can get back to the sorts of discussions which are taking place in Geneva when some accord was reached, and that both sides begin to pull back from this. And I have to say that includes the government in Ukraine, which did not insist on the dismantling of the protest there as agreed at Geneva. That needs to be done by all sides. It needs to be fair. This is the only way we can now proceed. It is a very dangerous situation. And any war involving Russia and the West would be very serious for the world. And I think everyone needs to draw breath, think about this, and pull back from these kinds of military operations that we're seeing.
Some experts assert that this is an attempt to drag Russia into a conflict. What are your thoughts on this?
I think that certainly sections of the government in Ukraine and Kiev want to do that. They actually want a confrontation with Russia. They have a fairly crazed right-wing nationalist agenda. At the same time, I think the West have to be openly and honest and say that actually they're not in a position to fight a military conflict with Russia. The Americans are not able to do that at this moment in time, and therefore, if that's the case, they should be actually scaling back the sorts of rhetoric we are seeing from too many people in the West, and saying a peaceful solution is the only way forward here. And actually, the people who are responsible for those killings in Odessa are formerly allies of the European Union and of NATO, and the European Union and NATO should be loud in condemnation of what happened in Odessa. I am waiting to hear that sort of condemnation come through.
Well, who would benefit if a conflict were to break out between the West and Russia?
In the long term, I think you have to understand that this would take place against the background of a Western American NATO agenda, which is to encircle Russia with NATO and allied states and American bases. However, are the West in a position to do that? I'm not sure they are in a position to do that. As I say, after their experiences in Iraq and Afghanistan and Libya, indeed, there is little taste in either the United States or Western Europe for further military interventions of these kind. And I think this is actually the most irresponsible thing that what Washington and the various European capitals should be doing, is stoking up rhetoric, implying actually they're prepared to go ahead with military intervention, when in fact they're not serious about it. And that's why I think we do need to scale back on all this.
Well, given the ongoing violence, will we see presidential elections hold in the country?
I think the presidential elections look fairly farcical in this situation. The truth is that any president elected by these elections would only speak for half of the country in terms of Ukraine, and effectively it would copper fasten partition, which is what looks like what's happening here. And I think that's going to be a tragedy. Partition is always a tragedy. Far better that Ukraine had remained where it was. It's essentially balancing between, on the one hand, Russia, and on the other hand, Europe, Western Europe and the European Union. Whenever either side insists that Ukraine has to opt for one or the other, it was going to lead for tragedy. And really, the European Union should have thought this through before encouraging people in Kiev with the idea that they're somehow going to be able to join the European Union. Incidentally, that is not an offer on the table. The European Union is not going to allow Ukraine to offer, and they have been irresponsible, in my opinion, in encouraging this.
Well, could these elections have any positive impact on the situation in the country?
Little, because in all honesty, I think given the background that's going to take place against the killings we've seen in Odessa and elsewhere, effectively it's going to mean there will be elections in Western Ukraine and not in eastern and parts of southern Ukraine. And as I say, I think it's going to lead to undermine the division of the country, which seems to be what's happening. And as I say, is, as always, a tragedy.
And now Washington wants to impose more sanctions against Moscow. Will that have any impact on the Kremlin's decision on how to move forward?
Not really. I think the sanctions are aimed at individuals, as you know, inside the Russian administration and security forces and in big business, supposedly Putin's allies. I'm not really sure that those people are going to be worried about not being able to travel to Western Europe for their summer holiday. I think there is considerable doubt about imposing tougher economic sanctions in Western Europe, given Western Europe's close economic ties with Russia. And also we're seeing the Americans considering unilaterally going ahead with increasing the sanctions despite the Americans because of that. I'm not really sure the sanctions are going to go anywhere. And the truth is, at the end of the day, the West needs Russia in terms of the situation in Syria and other trouble spots around the world. How far they want to go down this road, I don't know, but it doesn't bode well for peace across the world. No,
it doesn't indeed. Mr. Chris Bambry there, political analyst, thank you very much for joining us today. Now, in other news, at least 65 fighters have been killed after heavy infighting erupted between rival militant groups in the eastern Syrian city of Deir el-Zur. This as the Syrian army made major advances on Mliha, a town strategically located southeast of Damascus.
The fierce battle between Al-Qaeda affiliate Al-Nusra Front and the breakaway Islamic State of Iraq in the Levant has raged for days, despite an order from Al-Qaeda chief Ayman al-Zawahiri to stop the infighting. Residents of the town of Busayra, home to 35,000 people, Abria, with a population of 12,000, and Al-Zir, where 15,000 people call home, have nearly all been displaced by the heavy fighting in the area. Allahu Akbar! Allahu Akbar! In a recent development, Al-Nusra Front announced today its conditions for ending the current clashes, saying as soon as ISIL announces the end of its attacks on Muslims, the Al-Qaeda affiliate group will spontaneously stop firing on ISIL targets. The latest showdown between Al-Nusra and ISIL erupted on Wednesday in the oil-rich Deir ez-Zor province, which borders neighboring Iraq. Elsewhere, the government forces advanced around Syria's second city Aleppo and took control of the road leading to the airport amid heavy clashes which led to the army taking control of several hills overlooking key points in the area. In addition, according to military sources, Syria's army made major advances on the Mleha front, a town strategically located southeast of Damascus near the airport road. The army has reached the town hall building, and all the roads leading to the town are now in the army's hands, as is the south, the west, and the southeast. Its capture would be very important for the army to secure the town of Jaramana, a government-controlled, majority Druze and Christian suburb of Damascus, near Mleha. Jaramana, like other parts of Damascus, has been under heavy mortar fire since the beginning of armed insurgency in the country. Analysts suggest the recent army victories will comfort the majority of Damascenes, as it will render the outskirts of Damascus mortar-free.
Syria's Supreme Constitutional Court announced incumbent President Bashar al-Assad, widely expected to remain in power, and two other hopefuls have been accepted to run in the June 3rd presidential vote. President Bashar al-Assad, along with Maher Abdel Hafiz Hajar and Hassan Abdullah al-Nouri, will compete in the upcoming elections for the country's top job during the country's first multi-candidate vote. Meanwhile, Syria's armed opposition groups have reached a deal with the government for the withdrawal of militants from the city of Homs, where heavy clashes have been taking place for 2 years. An opposition negotiator by the name of Abul Harith al-Khalidi announced that an agreement has been reached between opposition representatives and Syrian government officials in the presence of the Iranian ambassador for the pullout of fighters from the old city to the northern countryside of Homs. Further talks will now focus on the implementation of the deal. Dr. Bassam Abu Abdullah, a political analyst, joins us now over the phone for more on the latest developments in Syria. Dr. Abu Abdullah, how significant is the withdrawal of militant groups from Homs?
I think it's a very important step. First of all, we can consider that Homs is free from the militants and rebels, and it gives opportunity for other places, because there is no future for these groups, and I think they lost everything, and the Syrian army could achieve these targets through military options, but I think the Syrian government is trying to use the peaceful way to finish this problem. Nowadays we can say that Homs as the center of Syria is free if this agreement would be realized.
And do you expect that this deal to be fully implemented?
Again, please, the question again?
Do you expect this deal to be fully implemented? Will it go through?
We don't know. There is an official information until now. I think the real information, the government will declare that. And the information until now that tomorrow will be this agreement implemented. We don't know exactly. Still, this information not official.
Okay, so now where are these militants likely to retreat to? Where will they leave to from Homs?
The militants who want from them to have a deal with the government to come back to his civilian life, there is open way. But I think that there are foreigners inside Homs. We don't know exactly, because the United Nations generally and some European states, they were interested in different occasions in the old Homs only. And I think it means that there are some foreigners inside the old city. We don't know exactly, but I think they will go, as I understood, some of them to their Zor or to other neighborhood outside of Homs.
Okay, so you said earlier that this gives hope for other places. What happened in Homs could be repeated in other places. Could we see similar deal probably in Aleppo?
I think Aleppo is another situation, because here the number of the foreigners is more than other places, because of the role of the Turkish government in supporting terrorism in the north of Syria. Anyway, I think the Syrian army is doing well in the countryside of Aleppo, and I think we will see good results in the near future. But the most important thing that near Damascus, almost many of neighborhoods, they they had a deal, and this is the only way for these people, because the atmosphere generally in the public opinion of Syria that there is a huge and radical change in the attitude of the Syrian people towards the terrorism.
And what can you tell us about the Syrian army's major advances in the strategic Mliha town? How significant is this?
I think the last information that during maybe 48 hours or more than they will declare Mliha as a free neighborhood, and it will be react on other neighborhoods like Douma and the Eastern Ghouta. And I think we will see radical changes in the atmosphere around Damascus, because it will be stop the attack of the neighborhood in Damascus.
Okay, Dr. Bassam Abu Abdallah there, political analyst. Thank you very much for taking the time to speak with us today. Militants have attacked a bus carrying Shiite pilgrims north of the Iraqi capital, killing 11 people and wounding 21 others, while a family of 8 was shot dead south of Baghdad. In the deadliest attack since the country held parliamentary elections 4 days ago, a roadside bomb exploded on the outskirts of the town of Balad and was followed by gunmen opening fire on the bus full of pilgrims returning from Samarra, north of the capital. Well, 4 days after Iraqis voted in the country's first parliamentary elections since the withdrawal of U.S. troops in 2011, the counting of ballots is in full swing. Preliminary results suggest that Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki has taken a convincing lead.
Vote counting continued across Iraq following the country's first parliamentary elections since the withdrawal of U.S. troops in 2011. In Basra, a United Nations delegation observed election workers counting and sorting ballots from Wednesday's polls. According to the head of the city's main counting center, ballot boxes had been received from smaller counting stations and results were now being verified.
The number of ballot boxes that we received from 5 counting centers is 1,072. I have 40 crew members counting votes. We plan to count 200 every day. That's a polling station every day. We immediately declare the result of the ballot box that we counted, and we hang the results on the wall.
In the country's capital, Baghdad, the scene was similar.
The vote counting process started at 8 a.m. and is underway now. We received instructions to attach the ballot paper to the barcode of the report. There are no violations so far.
Preliminary election results are not expected for at least 2 weeks. However, very early returns suggest that Iraq's Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki appears likely to remain the dominant political figure, while all major parties appear to be drawing fewer votes than 4 years earlier.
The Islamic Republic of Iran has successfully tested its latest missile defense system called Mirsad, or ambush in English. The anti-aircraft system was domestically designed and manufactured. In an operational test conducted at Iran's Khatam al-Anbiya air defense base, the mid-altitude missile system successfully targeted an unmanned aerial vehicle. The state-of-the-art technology used in Mirsad links it to other anti-aircraft batteries and provides it with the unique ability to combat electronic warfare. You're watching Al Ittijah World News, still to come. Uneasy calm returns to northeastern India after separatists killed dozens of Muslim villagers. Welcome back. A reminder of our top stories. Deadly clashes continue between Ukrainian troops and pro-Russian activists as military operations against anti-government protesters expand. Heavy infighting between rival extremist militant groups leaves more than 60 dead in Deir el-Zur province as the Syrian army makes major advances on the strategic Mliha town. And violence across Iraq, including an attack on Shia pilgrims, claims more than 30 lives in 24 hours. Afghanistan declared Sunday a national day of mourning following a landslide in a remote region of the country, as rescue teams abandoned their search for survivors. Now, this as conflicting reports emerge over the number buried in up to the 100 meters of mud.
A national day of mourning in Afghanistan, not for victims of war, but this time victims of nature. Afghanis mourned hundreds of victims entombed in a blanket of earth nearly 30 feet deep a day after a side of a mountain caved in, turning an entire village into a massive grave.
After the landslide happened, I came here along with my friends to rescue our relatives, but we could not rescue them. A huge number of people have been killed and a number of others are trapped under the mud.
Large crowds gathered at the remote disaster site, where the volume of deep mud covering houses made rescue efforts hopeless. Only a few dead bodies had been pulled from the debris. Local people and emergency workers had used shovels to try to dig out survivors, but without success. Relief workers scrambled to care for about 700 displaced families as aid groups rushed to reach survivors of the landslide.
We have found this injured child who was trapped under the mud. He has got injuries on his head and is now undergoing treatment in the health clinic of the area, and we have provided him with necessary medication.
Government officials said the current death toll was at least 300 and warned it could rise by hundreds more after initial reports suggested that as many as 2,500 people may have died. It's been hard for emergency teams to reach the site. The narrow roads have been damaged by rain, and heavy machinery, typically used in such recovery efforts, have been difficult to transport, therefore prompting officials to call off rescue operations after having lost hope for any survivors. Also, the possibility that yet another chunk of earth may cleave from the nearby mountain has kept rescue workers on high alert.
The Yemeni army has killed 37 al-Qaeda members and wounded dozens of others in the southern province of Shabwa. The attacks in the Maifa region come amid a large-scale military operation which was launched by the country's security forces last week in the southern parts of Yemen. Libya's parliament has elected Ahmed Maitig as the country's new prime minister after receiving 120 votes in the 185-seat General National Congress. The vote came after the country's parliament failed earlier in the day to elect a new premier. It was the second time in a week that the GNC, Libya's top political authority, met to decide who will be in charge of the new government. Twin blasts in Kenya's coastal city of Mombasa have killed at least 3 people and wounded several others. One of the attacks came as grenades were thrown into a crowded bus that had just arrived from Nairobi, while the other blast happened at the gate of a hotel at a local beach. No one has claimed responsibility for the explosions. However, the al-Qaeda-affiliated Al-Shabaab group has recently carried out similar attacks in the area. Now, South Sudanese government forces announced that they had overrun a key rebel base as heavy fighting rages for control of the northern oil hub of Bantui following a major offensive. The attack comes just days after the country's President Salva Kiir agreed during a visit by U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry to hold direct talks with rebel leader Riek Machar on ending the brutal 4-month-old conflict. The United Nations is considering the use of unarmed drones to monitor sectarian violence in the Central African Republic ahead of the deployment in September of 12,000 peacekeepers in the restive nation.
The international community is still unsure how to end the violence in the Central African Republic. The sectarian killing spree broke out in the chronically unstable country last year, when mostly Christian militias mercilessly attacked the Muslim community after the Salika, a mostly Muslim rebel group, temporarily seized power in a coup staged in March 2013. The mass killing caused much of the minority Muslim population to flee their homes, with the capital almost entirely emptied of Muslims. Currently, a joint EU and African Union peacekeeping force is trying to bring stability back to the African nation. However, the UN peacekeeping mission is expected to take over in September, with nearly 12,000 soldiers deployed in the country. UN Under-Secretary General for Peacekeeping Operations Harvey Latsos arrived in the Central African Republic to pave the way for the transition, and even discussed the possibility of using unmanned drones to monitor the violence.
We are mulling the possibility of deploying unmanned aircraft systems to see what is happening on the ground for surveillance. I think this is a very useful instrument in this type of territory.
Latsos' three-day visit came just over 3 months after the newly appointed President Catherine Samba-Panza took over, with reconciliation between the country's Christian and Muslim communities looking more and more unlikely, amid warnings that the country is on the brink of a genocide.
South Korean President Park Geun-hye has again visited the site where a ferry capsized on April 16, killing hundreds of people. Geun-hye met the grieving relatives of passengers who were aboard the ferry, warning that those responsible for the tragic incident will be sternly punished. 8 more bodies were found on Sunday, raising the confirmed death toll to 244. Now, following a deadly attack on a Muslim community in India's northeast state of Assam, the Indian Army has been called in to prevent any further bloodshed. Authorities, meanwhile, have blamed an outlawed tribal group for the massacre that saw 35 people gunned down.
24 hours of a persistent bloodbath in India's northeast may have finally come to an end. The number of those Muslims who were shot dead as they slept in the village of Assam has reached 35. Many of whom are women and children. Thousands more were forced to flee their homes. The Indian Army has been rushed to the area. Armored trucks were seen patrolling the streets of the Kokrajhar and Baksa districts. Around 2,000 soldiers were deployed and given shoot-on-sight orders amid a curfew imposed early on Sunday. The perpetrators are believed to be militants from the outlawed National Democratic Front of Budaland, an ethnic group that is demanding a separate homeland to be split from Assam. The reasons behind the massacre are still unclear. According to local media, the tribal group was angered by the residents' refusal to support Bodo's candidates in last month's elections. The group, however, denies any responsibility. The carnage has sparked the fury of the Muslim community in Assam. Families of the victims now refuse to bury their relatives, demanding that the Chief Minister Tarun Gogoi personally visit the site of the killings. The latest aggression is believed to be the worst in Assam in nearly 2 years. Over 100 people were killed in large-scale riots in 2012, sparking fears about repeated discriminatory acts of violence against the small minority group.
For centuries, India's holiest city, Varanasi, has been famed for producing the finest hand-woven silk. But undercut by mass-produced machine garments and competition from China, craftsmen fear the industry will be dead within a generation.
Thread by thread, Sardar is carrying on a tradition that's been in his family for centuries. For 40 years, he's hand-woven the fine silk for which India's holy city, Varanasi, is famous. But he fears his craft will soon die out.
It's only people like me keeping it alive. There's no profit in it anymore. There's no market for our products, so it doesn't pay well. The government doesn't do anything to help us, and so weavers are getting other jobs.
In a decade, the number of working handlooms in the city has dropped by more than half. Weavers producing silk on machines earn twice as much because they can stitch more cloth each day. This local sari shop stocks more and more cheaper factory-made garments. Though for an upcoming wedding, this mother and daughter only want the finest kind.
इसीलिए हर जगह मतलब हर शहरों में यहाँ से जो लोग भी आते हैं यहाँ पे बनारसी साड़ी जरूर ले जाते हैं खरीद के.
The hand-woven silks are part of our culture. We wear them at weddings and other special occasions. These traditional saris play a very important role in weddings. We buy them as gifts for our daughters and daughter-in-laws.
इसलिए ज़्यादा फेमस है.
Weavers are hoping India's national election will prove a turning point in the industry's fortunes. Opposition leader Narendra Modi, who is running for a seat in Varanasi, has pledged to help them by improving basic infrastructure so they can boost production.
When these problems will be taken care of, then we'll be able to focus more on our products than to worry about these basic things that we don't have electricity, we don't have roads and we don't have infrastructure.
According to legend, the Buddha was covered in Varanasi silk when he was laid to rest. Now, with competition growing in other Indian states and from neighbouring China, weavers hope changes will happen soon and customers will be buying their finest silk for generations to come.
A symbol of Lebanon's golden age, but also its brutal civil war, the empty shell of the Holiday Inn Hotel in Beirut could now take on a new life. No one yet knows what it will become, but after decades as a chilling reminder of the 1975-1990 conflict, the building is set to be auctioned off in the coming months.
These were once sea view rooms in one of Beirut's most luxurious hotels. But the hotel is now an empty war relic set to be auctioned off. The Holiday Inn was in business barely 2 years before civil war erupted in Lebanon in 1975. It became a makeshift landmark, dividing majority Christian East Beirut from mainly Muslim West. One of the most iconic images to emerge from the war is a billow of black smoke rising from a fire inside the hotel.
It was like something we see nowadays in horror films. A haunted tower. There was destruction. There was fire. The hotel was full of bodies all over the place. It really was a terrifying sight.
منشورة بمحلات كتيرة بقلبه فعلا كان منظر مرعب.
The hotel walls are still riddled with the holes left by bullets and rockets. Inside its walls, graffiti tells the tale of fierce fighting between Christian militias and Palestinian fighters allied with Lebanese Muslims and leftists. Its shareholders are locked in a dispute as the iconic hotel is set to go under the hammer in the coming months. The real estate company CIL, which holds over 30% of the shares in the building, wants to renovate and fill it with luxury lofts.
We think it's interesting for a city like Beirut to have a building with a historical dimension alongside all the construction that has gone up over the years.
One former fighter says he hopes to see the area restored to its pre-war glory.
Like we hope to go back to our work and reconstruct our villages and live with our families, we also hope that Beirut and the hotels area will be like it was in 1976 and regain its beautiful image.
A Kuwaiti group that owns half the hotel shares is keen to see the site demolished to make way for a new tower block. Scores of modern towers have already sprung up in the skyline of post-war Beirut. If the winning bidder opts to follow the trend and demolish the Holiday Inn, an important piece of Beirut's history will be lost.
For hundreds of years, connecting Britain with France by digging underneath the sea has been a dream for leaders of both countries. 20 years ago, on May 6, 1994, that dream came true. The channel has welcomed 330 million passengers since it first opened and is gearing up for many more.
20 years ago to the day, Queen Elizabeth II and French President François Mitterrand cut the red ribbon on one of the world's largest technological achievements, the Channel Tunnel, connecting the UK to the continent by rail. Willie Crooks was one of the first to brave the train ride underneath the water.
With the British Queen, I thought it would be terribly formal, but in the end, I had the feeling she's very nice and approachable. And she talks to you completely normally.
No surprises, however, for the company that now operates the channel. With 38 kilometers of rails running underwater, Eurotunnel isn't taking any chances when it comes to security. Trains undergo regular checkups in this hangar spanning almost a kilometer long. And maintenance crew are often called in at the last minute to fix up trains before departure. This control tower on the British side monitors traffic, and eagle eyes are called for, with an average of 400 trains a day and 10 different trains in the tunnel at any given moment.
We've got passenger shuttles, tourist shuttles, which are identified starting with the number 6. We have the Eurostars identified by the number 9 and truck shuttles by the number 7. We basically deal with any problems in real time, whether it's in the tunnel or on the terminals.
Though 330 million people have crossed the channel since it opened, Eurotunnel's finances were rocky at first. The company was close to bust before a major overhaul lent it new momentum in 2007. Profits have more than tripled since, thanks to freight traffic, British passengers, and sport.
The curve started going up with the 2012 Olympic Games, when passenger numbers jumped by 10%. That's when our customers got a taste for the train, I would say, because their numbers have increased since then, including last year as well.
First imagined in the 19th century, the channel was finally realized 200 years later, a most successful entente cordiale between these two neighboring nations.
Libraries are a treasure chest of literature as they provide the younger generation with the necessary tools to attain knowledge. An educational community in Sudan is participating in a drive to inspire a love of reading among children. Our Khartoum correspondent Ahmed Saeed Ahmed has that story.
Books have always been at the heart of the human pursuit for knowledge. A youth initiative in Sudan named Education for All is working to popularize books among children through different means.
The initiative is a stand for the school library. We want to raise awareness about the importance of school libraries. We want people to get more interested in it, children and parents and teachers. So today we're organizing Children's Reading Day.
The Children's Annual Reading Day is in itself a public endeavor where children gather to read books outside of their daily routine. They are accompanied by familiar faces, helping them to relax and enjoy.
They read one book. They stay in a group and they read it. Maybe the volunteer is reading a book and they explain to the child about what is talking about this book. And then they are asked about the book, about the idea.
Different books are on offer for the children to read in Arabic and English. And the initiative arranges for adults to be on hand to help the children understand whatever may prove difficult to fathom.
Reading itself, it's really fun. We intended this event to be in a public place so that they can meet their friends and families, so that it would be more fun and be themselves.
The event is coupled with a talent show and an atmosphere where the adults hang back and let the children express themselves freely. When the wisdom of the old and the passion of the young merge, the future looks brighter. And this, the Annual Reading Day, is designed by this youth initiative to endear reading and education in general to the budding leaders of tomorrow. Ahmed Saeed Ahmed, Al-Ittijah News Channel, Khartoum.
And recapping our top stories. Deadly clashes continue between Ukrainian troops and pro-Russian activists as military operations against the anti-government protesters expand. Heavy infighting between rival extremist militant groups leaves more than 60 dead in Deir el-Zur province as the Syrian army makes major advances on the strategic Mliha town. And violence across Iraq, including an attack on Shia pilgrims, claims more than 30 lives in 24 hours. That's it for today. Have a good night.